Week 17 of the fantasy football season. So with the finals coming up for fantasy owners in their championships, here's a few defense DST units I would add this week. The first DST, the New England Patriots. They just make the list out there in 51% of fantasy leagues, and they just clinched a playoff spot in Week 17, a slam dunk matchup at the New York Jets. They give up the 7th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few weeks for the Patriots, Week 13 versus the Giants, 15 points allowed, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery, a return touchdown. Week 15 versus the Bills, it was a bad game. They blew in that one. 35 points allowed, 2 sacks. And then Week 16 at Baltimore, come from behind victory, down 11 going into the fourth quarter. 24 points allowed, a sack, 2 fumble recoveries. So this week a slam dunk matchup, like I said, at the New York Jets. It might be the rookie Brady Cook once again in their quarterback, or it might be Justin Fields or Tyrod Taylor, but whoever it is, I think New England's defense, they could go out there. They obviously can make plays. They're one of the best teams in the league. And this Jet offense all season long has had trouble putting points on the board and turning the football over. So this week, New England definitely a good option off the waiver wire. The next DST, the Los Angeles Chargers, they went into Dallas, and second half of that ball game, they shut down the Dallas Cowboy offense. So the last few weeks for the Chargers, Week 14 versus Philly, 19 points allowed, a sack, 4 interceptions, a fumble recovery. Week 15, the Chiefs, 13 points allowed, 5 sacks, 2 INTs. In Week 16, the Cowboys, 17 points allowed, sack, a fumble recovery in that one. So Week 17, a pretty decent matchup versus the Houston Texans, where we know their offense stalls out a lot and they settle for a lot of field goals. This is Houston Texan team. But CJ Stroud, he's been decent over the last couple weeks, but still, I think Los Angeles, they could get to him a few times in this game. Their defense has played good offenses over the last 3 weeks and held their own. And this week, they're definitely in it, and they're out there in 59% fantasy leagues. Next DST, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs, I know their defense has been hit or miss. We're out there in 60% of fantasy leagues is this DST of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Week 14 versus New Orleans, 24 points allowed, 3 sacks and interception. Week 15 versus the Falcons, 29 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery. In Week 16, the Panthers, 23 points allowed, 2 sacks. So this week, their streaming option, good matchup for the Dolphins with Quinn Edwards in their quarterback. I don't think he's going to do much in this ball game. I know Tampa Bay, they definitely struggled over the last few weeks, obviously, but this defense of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they could get to the quarterback at times. Their secondary, I don't think is all that bad, and they're just not getting turnovers has been the problem for them over the last few weeks. But this week is a streaming option with a good matchup at the Dolphins that give up the 10th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. They're in there this week. Next DST, the Tennessee Titans. So Tennessee, their defense for the most part this season has been a bad unit all season long, but another streaming option out there in 82% of fantasy leagues. And this week they got a good matchup versus the New Orleans Saints. I give up the 3rd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few weeks for the Titans, Week 14 at Cleveland, 29 points allowed, 2 sacks, an INT, a fumble recovery, a block kick. Week 15 at the Niners, they got blown out, 37 points allowed, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. In Week 16 versus Chiefs without Mahomes, 9 points allowed, 4 sacks, and a safety. So like I said, this week a good matchup on paper versus Saints. They give up the 3rd most points to DSTs on the season. But the thing is, New Orleans, obviously, they've been playing better football of late, but I still think Tennessee, in a home game where their defense has been better at home than it's been on the road, could go out there and be a decent streaming option out there in 82% of fantasy league. I know DST is the New York Giants. So the Giants, last week I thought played a decent ball game versus the Minnesota Vikings. And this week it's a good matchup at the Vegas Raiders that give up the most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So New York is a 1-week streaming option. I think that they could go out there. They could get pressure on Geno Smith in this ball game. It's an indoor game as well, which is good, where defense don't have to deal with the outside elements and won't get fatigued easier. So the last few weeks for this Giant DST, Week 13 at the Pats, 33 points allowed, 3 sacks. Week 15 versus the Commanders, 29 points allowed, 2 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. In Week 16 versus the Vikings, like I said, they had a good ball game even though they lost 16-13. 16 points allowed, 4 sacks, an interception, and a fumble recovery for a touchdown in that one. So this week is a streaming option with a good matchup at the Raiders. They're good ad this week, available in 89% of fantasy leagues. That's a few defense DST units I looked at off the wire for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.